Imagine it's 2025 and Apple has just released the new Mac Studio, the most powerful Mac ever, with M3 Ultra and the ability to embed up to 512 gigabytes of RAM. Wow, nearly half a terabyte of RAM. That should lend itself very well to large language model inference. Or should it? What is the biggest large language model you can run on this? And how fast is it going to be? In this video, I'm going to make some predictions. And I would love for you, if you're watching this from the future, to comment below how off I was with my predictions. All right, let's go. So first of all, let's answer the question, how big is the model which you can put into this beast? If you do 4-bit quantization, and this LLM calculator, I've introduced it in a different video, you should be able to have a model with up to 1 trillion parameters in it. What is quantization? Briefly, it means that the precision of the parameters is not stored at full precision. In this case, full precision usually means floating point 16, which would take 2 bytes per parameter. In this case, since we do 4-bit quantization, we have to divide the total number of parameters roughly by a factor of 2, which would be able to fit it into the RAM. And what about if we do 8-bit quantization? In this case, we would be able to fit a model of up to 506 billion parameters into RAM. This explains Apple's claim that you can fit models with over 600 billion parameters entirely in memory. In this case, these are not 600 billion parameter models in floating point 16, but probably in quant 4 or something like that. So as I've demonstrated to you. Let's have a look at the other question, which is far more interesting. If we fit this really big model, so let's say something like DeepSeek R1, will it run with decent performance? First of all, I have to set a certain baseline for you on this. Let me introduce you to this performance overview of Llama CPP on Apple Silicon M series. Here we have a list of the different M1 chips, and this is for Llama 7 billion parameters. 7 billion parameters is a rather small model by today's standards. What I want you to notice here is that the M1 Ultra will be able to do prompt processing at 1030 tokens per second and do token generation at 83.73 tokens per second, which is really fast. So as humans, we feel comfortable if it's 10 tokens and above. Everything else below that feels sluggish. And if it goes to 1 token per second, or that region to 5 tokens per second, you will actually feel bored reading it, and you will feel that the model is sluggish. In that case, you're waiting for the computer rather than the computer waiting for you. Now, the thing I want you to notice is that these numbers do not explode. So the M1 Ultra, which also has 800 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth, same as the M2 Ultra, they do have a difference. Please note that this has 64 GPU cores and this has 76 GPU cores. So this has 894.27, and specifically also the prompt processing is about 20% faster here. But if you look at the M3 Ultra, we are going to, these numbers are not populated. So I made up some estimates, and that's the first part I'm going to share with you. Just briefly to recap, M1 Ultra launched in 2022, M2 Ultra in 2023, and M3 Ultra in 2025. And the max memory bandwidth is roughly the same at 800, and now Apple is claiming 819. Although the max memory has significantly increased from 128 gigabytes to 512 gigabytes. And the GPU cores also have increased from 64 to 80 cores, as has the power consumption. So let's see. We have a chart here for the same Llama 7B, by the way, with 4-bit quantization. And my prediction is that we will hit somewhere around 100 tokens per second on a prompt on text generation, and about 1,400 on prompt processing in this chart. For the top-of-the-line 80 GPU core model, and for the 60 GPU core model, we should hit something like 1,150 tokens per second for prompt processing and 92 tokens per second for text generation. Again, with the Llama 7 billion parameter model at 4-bit quantization. My rationale for this is some additional calculations and estimations I've done. So the naive approach would be to scale the prompt processing and output speed with the amount of GPUs, or maybe with the memory bandwidth, but this does not quite work. Now, if we simply would multiply the GPU cores, we would arrive at the text generation speed of 206 tokens per second for the M2 Ultra with 76 GPU cores. And obviously it's about more than a factor 2 lower than that. Because of that, when estimating the M3 Ultra performance, which will be released in a couple of days, we have to take into account some correction factors. Now, on the M1 Ultra, the correction was less heavy than anticipated. So possibly on the M3 Ultra, if Apple does a good job, it's also going to be better than on the M2 Ultra. Or maybe it's going to be worse, who knows. But my prediction is 100 tokens per second for the 7B model. This is an interesting chart we should look at in that context. This graphs the prompt processing performance against the GPU cores. As you see, the more GPU cores we get, the higher the performance in tokens per second. So it stands to reason that 80 cores will continue to boost this. Remember my prediction of going even higher with the prompt processing performance. Because this seems to be quite linearly connected to the GPU cores versus actually the memory bandwidth or the lack of increased memory bandwidth. Because even though it's 819 gigabytes per second, it's not like 1000, 1200 or 2400 gigabytes per second. Apple is not using HBM, high bandwidth memory, for their Mac, because otherwise the Mac would be even more expensive. Then we have the token generation performance versus bandwidth. And as you see, it is correlated with bandwidth, but essentially as bandwidth increases, it does not increase linearly with bandwidth. And the cores also play a certain role. So the more cores, the better or the higher the performance in tokens per second. But again, this is not quite linear, which is why we have to deduct from our prediction, which I've given here. Now let's have a look at another interesting graph, because you're not wondering, okay, how fast will Llama 7B run? It will run fast enough. It will be very pleasant. The question is, how will really large language models run? LNVID has created a really nice graph with different models they've run in different parameter sizes and quantizations. Briefly note this 8 times 7B at quant 5 here is a mixture of experts model, which does take more RAM but does not compute all parameters, but instead it chooses an expert and then just the expert's parameters are calculated, which is why the performance on this model is naturally better for its total parameter size class. Here we have a prediction of up to 120B parameters at quant 4, and this will run, or it's not a prediction, it's a measurement. This will run on the M2 Ultra with 76 cores at 192 gigabytes of RAM at 5 tokens per second. This chart, by the way, is quite interesting generally because it allows you to compare RTX cards from Nvidia. So, for example, you can compare a double RTX 4090 24 GPU or a 3090 with 24 gigabytes against Mac Silicon models and the performance. Here are the main Macs you want to be looking at. I've taken that data and calculated the approximate size of the models which were run, so the approximate RAM size, and I've plotted RAM versus the token speed in this chart. Notice this is a logarithmic representation, since we are seeing multiple orders of magnitude here. So this data here, this series, this is the M2 Ultra with 192 gigabytes of RAM, which goes down to 5 tokens per second. If you continue that data series, so in this case it's the black, it's Excel modeling the curve, and we go to RAM sizes of about 500 gigabytes and beyond. In the case the M.2 Ultra would be running it, we end up between 1 and 2 tokens per second. Now my prediction is for the M3 Ultra that we should be roughly between 1 and 3 tokens per second on really large language models at Quant 4. At Quant 5 I think it will be lower, so I estimate that models which you would use a more exotic quant like Quant 5 would be at maybe 1.5 tokens per second, and models at Quant 4 which really use nearly all of the RAM, or Quant 8, would be roughly at 2 to 3, maybe 2.5 tokens per second. So actually not really usable for real-time inference, that is. Again, if you get to own such a Mac and are able to run that, such a big model, and you get 15 tokens per second, please definitely comment below and tell me that I was way off base. But my prediction is that we will not see very big inference speeds, because specifically the model size determines the inference speed and the amount of compute which you have to invest. So it's not just about having a big RAM, but it's also about the bigger the model is, the more computations have to be run, and it increases non-linearly. If you like my video so far, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Now I'll go into a couple of extra things and considerations concerning the new Mac Ultra Studio. First of all, it's got 2 Thunderbolt 5 ports on the front and 4 Thunderbolt 5 ports on the back, and of course also a 10 gigabit Ethernet port. These matter if you want to run something like EXO. EXO, in case you do not know it, allows you to cluster large language models across several computers, which will auto-discover themselves. These can also be a mixture, as this screenshot shows, of different types of computers. In this case, it's a MacBook and Linux boxes with Nvidia GeForce GPUs, connected together and doing inference in unison. communicating through the network. That is why the Thunderbolt 5 ports matter. If you want to do inference and you want to cluster these Max Studio Ultras with the M3 Ultra chips, you will be able to connect the Macs through Thunderbolt 5, which will give you up to 120 gigabits per second of performance versus only 40 gigabits if you would use Thunderbolt 4, and only 10 gigabits per second if you use the Ethernet port. So there's major differences between these in networking performance. In compute centers, in data centers, Nvidia GPUs are interconnected using even faster connects, and that's what makes this inference speed possible, because the GPUs are able to communicate amongst themselves and exchange data. Roughly about the pricing or the options, so you can do the 60-core GPU version or the 80-core GPU version, which will cost you $1,500 more. The 512 gigabytes of unified memory will cost you $4,000 more. It's a one-time choice because it's built in, it's closely connected and tied together to the CPU, to the SoC actually, to the GPU, CPU, to the M3 Ultra chip. So it's a choice you have to make when purchasing the Mac. And the important bit, of course, is that it's unified memory. So the GPU is able to access all of this, which is in direct contrast to desktop PCs. For example, on this Windows desktop PC I'm recording this video on, I have 128 gigabytes of main main memory, but my GPU is not able to access this directly. It has its own 16 gigabytes of dedicated memory, which limits the size of models I can run on the GPU directly, and the size of model I can outsource to the GPU, which is the unique charm of the Macs, because they have a unified memory. And then concerning storage, if you want to go for the 16 terabytes SSD storage, it will cost you $4,600 more. So the top of the line Apple M3 Ultra Studio Mac will cost you $14,099. Another point, Apple is claiming a 16.9 times improvement in LLM throughput for token generation specifically, using an LLM with hundreds of billions of parameters in LM Studio compared to the M1 Ultra Mac. Now, they explain in 13 that the model was 174.63 gigabytes model. Again, I assume it's a quantized model. And pulling up my chart here, we can see that the max memory was 128 gigabytes with the M1 Ultra and 192 gigabytes with the M2 Ultra. So it was not possible to fit this entire model entirely into RAM, which possibly might mean that we are also seeing an influence of SSD transactions here on this comparison. I will write to Apple and ask them for further details, what model it was and at what quantization they ran it. But it's quite promising that the Mac Studio with M2 Ultra was also 2 times slower on this particular model, which does mean that because the model should be able to fit entirely into the RAM of the Mac Studio M2 Ultra, which was used. And it was also a 76-core GPU model, which is roughly comparable to our 80-core GPU model on the Apple M3 Ultra. So it stands to reason that we might still see a pleasant surprise. But as I say, on really big models, do not expect ChatGPT-like performance on them, on the Mac M3 Ultra. If it will do that, I'll eat my head publicly here on YouTube, and you comment below that I need to eat it, because if you get something like 10-15 tokens per second on DeepSeek R1 with the M3 Ultra, I will be seriously impressed. And I'll film a video with me eating my head. So please be sure to subscribe, comment below about from the future, about the real actual tokens. This is a video about predictions. And thank you for watching so far. If you've come so far, you can actually subscribe, because it means that you enjoyed my video, or didn't you? Have a great day, and thank you for watching.